O tēnā rā koutou katoa, he tika ki te mei ki ngā pūmanawa i waru o te arawa, tēnā koutou. He tika hoki ki te mei ki te tiamana, meripeka, tēnā koe, mō tō wawata o ngā mokopuna tamariki. He rangatira rāwari, tēnā koe, mō tēnei kaupapa, me hareti hoki, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ko Helen lei takawengawa, hei uri ahau, ono tangata wiwi, na tangata kotimana me airehe me tiamana hoki, engari, he kāinga hau ki ohakune raitahi. I want to firstly, before I talk about where I am now, really mihi to the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency in the North. In my previous role in Te Pūtaitanga o Te Waipounamu, we had extensive reach and coverage across the South Island. We had some 850 whānau entities, but we didn't have the same leverage ability. And so I particularly want to acknowledge what I believe is one of our greatest heroic leaders, John Tamahere. He was exceptional in terms of the leadership, the vision, the tenacity, and the bold spirit, which meant he could achieve the change that we needed to see. We were appreciative of his ability to wrap loving arms across Te Moana o Raukawa and extend from Tākaka in the north through to Ruakere in the south. And it was with great grace that he was able to make the way by which 141,000 whānau across Te Waipounamu were able to endure what we've endured over the last 3 years. We have a different situation. We had a different situation in Te Waipounamu. We didn't have 107 days, but we had a context which was a battlefield of trauma. We had lived through thousands of earthquakes across Kaikoura through to Otutahi. We had endured the tragedy, the fatalities of the brutal massacre on the mosques in Christchurch. We had withstood chaotic winds and floods and fires that were relentless. And so when people started talking about resilience, people in Te Waipounamu said, we've been here for the last 10 years. And so in our context, in terms of tūhono, what the leadership that was required was around fighting fear. So we shifted the narrative from talking about COVID-19, which was so last year, to talk about Manaaki 20. So we wanted to look at what we could do rather than what we didn't know. And in doing that, we were able to work with issues around mental health, around huge anxiety, triggered fear. For many of our whānau, being stuck in your house also triggered previous experiences of incarceration, of institutionalisation, or being forced to being brought together with a whānau that you didn't necessarily want to be living with during the period of lockdown. So within that context, being able to reach out to JT and for him to say, we can do this, we can create the way by which you are able to receive 25,000 hygiene packs was a huge benefit. But back to what I should be up here talking about, which is, so I moved from a population of 381,000 to a population of 1,000. It's quite a change, quite an adjustment. But in the rohe of Ruapehu, Ngātirangi, people who are invoking the spirit of Koro Ruapehu. So the context of our deed of settlement, Rukutia Te Mana, is around that karakia aruruku to invoke the spirit of Matua Te Mana, to always be inspired by the invigoration of koro, of the landscape of the whenua. And so I want to just acknowledge that and to acknowledge those who are Ngāti Rangi in the audience to be thinking of how that context of landscape, of whenua, of maunga, of awa, is so central when we're thinking about relationships. To acknowledge also two of our greatest po, Professor Sir Mason Dury and Whaitariana, both who have encouraged us. Whaitariana talked around the context of always placing faith in our families to restore to themselves the essence of who they are. Matua Mason talks about the awhiowhio principle, the tornado principle, that we are best when we are in the context of ever circulating relationships. And so if you look at those two, that is the definition of tūhono, placing faith in our families within a swirling whirlpool of change. And so when we look at what happened in the context of Wanganui, South Taranaki, Rangitikei, Ruakere, those bonds, those connections were always there because they were through the iwi. They were the bonds of whakapanaungatanga which came together through a context called Te Ranga Tupua. And Te Ranga Tupua had that notion of pātu watawata, that we are going to be protecting ourselves. And so we weren't looking for others to do that for us. The context was around being able to utilise whānau to do for themselves, to be their best ambassadors of hope. And I think in terms of the impact of that change, you'll tell me if I've gone on too long, won't you?
No,
yeah.
get the point. Awesome.
The impact of that change in October 2021, when our fabulous team, Ngā Waihu o Pairangi, sitting over here, when they were looking at the vaccination results, Ruakere had the second lowest rate in the country, which is not something to be proud of. We were sitting on 65%. When the rapid mobilisation team from Te Ranga Tupua came in, it turned that dial until in March 2022, we had achieved 92% of the population over 12 vaccinated. And so I think when we think leadership, it is that notion that leadership resides within us all. It's not waiting for someone to turn up and tell us how to do this. That whānau had the solutions. They had the solutions through talking together. And I think when we think of the hygiene packs, it was never about the hygiene packs. The hygiene packs was the means by which you could have a conversation, which might bring you to the fact that you find somebody who is in deep depression, or you find someone who simply doesn't have any other resources or no one else to talk to. It might be about being able to think about things that we can do once we're out of lockdown. And so the relationships, the leadership in the relationships, starting from that basis. And then Matua Whataranga used to talk about the kaupapa being like clouds, that you would then pick from each one. Oh, I think I need a little bit of manaakitanga or a little bit of kotahitanga. He did it much more eloquently than me. But it's that context that this is what the whānau want. How do we, as servants of that leadership, how do we find access to the products or the resources, the pūtea, by which these whānau can be strong in their own skin? And so that is the story of leadership that's continued. We have a context in Ngātirangi called Te Kōpai, which is simply a context like a nest, like a rounded wari, where we bring together government departments to see how the aspirations and the dreams of Ngātirangi to live vigorously, to live vibrantly for 1,000 years from now, how does that aspiration get best served by Ministry of Social Development or Ministry of Primary Industries or Department of Conservation? And so we bring those departments together. I've been in the job 3 weeks, so it hasn't happened yet, but it will. And I guess the opportunity of the deed of settlement is so exciting because it had all of those relationships listed, and we also extend across the rohi to include the pulp mill, to include the alpine lifts, Ruakere alpine lifts, to include anyone who's in the rohi. How can you best serve the aspirations of the uri of Ngātirangi? And so that's a good place to probably pass the rākau on. Kia ora.
Thank you, Helen. I think all your experience, South Island and Ngātirangi, from 300,000 to 1,000, you know, the question always is, not only does it scale up, how do we scale down? So I think all that insight's really, really powerful. Ness, I'm one of those ones who, yeah, I've heard all the good stuff about what we did. I'm actually really interested in the stuff that was tough. You know, the stuff that was hard and what the lessons are. So I'm interested in your kōrero on collective impact, trying to work with agencies that look like they want to be there. I've been on that side, as you know. They look like they want to be there and you think they're with you, but they're not. And so what do you do in terms of turning things around? Because I know Te Tihi has a lot of success in that area. Kia ora, Ness.
Okay, well, te tuatahi. Te tuatahi mihi atu kia tātou katoa i tēnei ahi, e hui mai. Ai kei raro i te kaupapa o Whānau Ora i tēnei wā. Ko ai tēnei, ki te taho tōku pāpa, no te aitanga māha ke rongo whakata, ki te taho tōku māma, he uri anō no taranaki maunga. Kia ora, Vanessa, Sidney-Richmond. Have the pleasure of being a kaimahi with these amazing whānau down here from Te Tihi o Ruahine Whānau Ora Alliance, who are based in, some of us are based, but we cover an area from the Tararua, coming across to Palmerston North, out to the Tokorangi Valley, and then down to the Horowhenua Otaki area. So we've got quite a diverse, we might not have a massive space, but we have quite a lot of diversity across our rohe. I just wanted to kind of say quickly before I answer Matawhau's question that in response to Brown, that COVID space was a time for everybody when it just threw everything up in the air, and all of a sudden we kind of didn't know what we were doing, who we were doing all sorts of different jobs. And while there was a lot of this angst and anxiety and uncertainty at that time, the one clear message from us as an organisation was, how will we keep the dreams and aspirations of our whānau alive in a time of such uncertainty? It added another layer of complexity to the mahi that our kaimahi do with our whānau. That's the hard stuff about how do you keep the moimoi alive for our whānau when we're in this pandemic, we're in this thing, we can't get to the shop, we can't do this, we can't do that. How do we do that without increasing the so-called dependency of our whānau? And so I think that for us has always been a driving space around how do we do that for our whānau. I'm going to sit down. But in terms of answering your question, yeah, I suppose collective impact is something that was new and shiny that came down from Te Pou Matakana a few years ago. And Shane was the one that brought that kōrero around the motu and sort of said, are you guys interested? And we said, sure. We have no idea what that is, and we know you don't either, but together we'll kind of figure that out. And so it was often used as, you know, we were trying to fly the plane as we were building it. And as a part of that, obviously, was having to understand, but actually having to get ahead of the ball game and understand what it was, because the partners that we were trying to recruit, so to speak, they didn't really know what it was either, and we were trying to sell that to them because it sounded okay, it aligned with what underlaid us, our foundations in Whānau Ora. And that piece around relationships is really around whanaungatanga. And how do we do that? And there is a way that we practice that is one about knowing who's who in the zoo. What is it that you bring to the table? What is the value that's added? But also, how do you manage people differently? And what is it, the strategies that you use to do that? Because I think sometimes I'm kind of a tad known for being a little bit grumpy at times. But after this morning with Kitty, I'm reframing that to being fiercely advocate.
Your husband will like that kōrero.
Because that's the part, though, isn't it? You know, that when we're out there having to have those discussions, and maybe we don't like to be in those spaces, and maybe we don't like the kōrero that we hear, or the, you know, that it has to be this way because that's how it's always been. But actually, does it have to be? And I think COVID is one time that showed us that all of those rules, the bureaucracy, the you must do this, you must do that, you fill in this form, you fill in that form, you wait 10 weeks to get nothing, you know, that all went out the door. And we were able to be the agile people that we are. We were able to function without having to negotiate all of that bureaucracy. We could just keep doing, and that, I think, gave us more energy, or it zapped less energy from us, because we didn't have to worry so much about that. It still happened. It didn't go away entirely. But I know for us too, when the COVID ended, or when it came to, you know, was tapering off, we talked about, there was often a government response about, you know, we'll go back to business as usual. What does business as usual look like? And our approach from our people and our governance and those in that space was about revitalisation, whakahaumanu. And how would we do that? And how would we continue to do what we were doing? Because actually nobody really wanted to go back to business as usual. That's not what we wanted to do. So I think also a lot of our partners in those spaces through collective impact, they are a lot of government organisations. Because for one reason or another, they're in our whānau lives. They don't exactly wake up every morning going, I want the police in my life, I want MSD in my life, I don't want to be able to get a job. You know, people don't actually wake up thinking that stuff, eh? But through the processes of colonisation, through their inability to understand what the rules of our engagement are because they're not shared, how do you do that? How do you engage and participate in a space when you're not actually sure what the rules are? And so I think that's been our ongoing piece around how do we change the rules, how do we work with our partners to actually educate them, because while they might be extremely educated with a lot of doctors and letters behind them in front of their names and wherever, actually do you understand our people? Do you understand our people who live and breathe in the streets? Do you know how to get to them? You know the hard to reach people? They live in the same place, they're still there today, tomorrow and the day after, you just don't know how to connect with them. And sometimes though, organisations have piggybacked on the back of that. They've piggybacked on the back of the relationships we have created with our whānau, with our hapore, without doing the work required. Because we've still got to go back there tomorrow and the day after, we still have to front our whānau, whereas sometimes others, they don't actually have to do that, nor do they see the importance of doing that. So some of it, I think, too, is actually showing and demonstrating to them that it is important to continue to engage with our hapore, because they are our people. They keep you in a job too, but they're also our people, and they deserve better than that.
Ka pai.
Ka pai.
Thank you, Ness. Kia ora, Tamara, no pressure. I know the Ruakere is a really important name. Those of us, you know, I grew up Hatupaora College, heaps of brothers from New Plymouth, from out that way, the Parihaka connection. Did a lot of work with Hayden recently, and you know, Tui Ora's mahi is well known to those of us down in those next to the woods. Really interested in kind of Tūhono and what it meant for you in your area. Kia ora.
Ka pai. O tēnā tātou katoa.
Is your mic going?
Aua.
Ka pai?
Kia ora?
Yep,
Okay.
yep, ka pai.
O ka pai. O tēnā tātou katoa. Ko Tamara Ruakere ahau no Taranaki. Ko ai au he pātau pai tēnā. Kei kare e mōhio e aku paranga, engari ko tōku hoa me oku tamariki no Taranaki e Tiatiawa, no reira ka piri tata au. I'd just like to start by also acknowledging our ngā ruahine whānau that are here today, our Ngāti Ruanui whānau who are also part of our Tānaki Whānau Ora collective, and tūtama wahine as well. There was a real struggle for us in Taranaki, but the strength of our COVID response was most definitely the people. We had very strong leadership at all levels, and the relationships that we hold within our hapore made a huge difference. Taranaki featured very poorly in the vaccination rates, so poorly actually that it was very concerning. Our DHB, it didn't really matter how many times they said equity, access, whānau Māori a priority, we weren't seeing it. You know, we tried really hard actually. And it took the voice of our iwi leaders to really step in, and they were strong, they were loud. Debbie was instrumental actually and didn't win many favours, but no one cared about that because what she had to say made a huge difference. And ngā iwi o Taranaki came together and they were unified. We all knew what we needed to do and what we wanted, and we just did everything that we could to ensure that we didn't face, I guess, the devastating impact of the previous flu. Yeah, we didn't wait for the system to be ready for us. We just got in. Our iwi leaders convened a hui, and we put together our own Māori COVID-19 response. So our hauora Māori providers, our Whānau Ora collective and our iwi o Taranaki were aligned and unified. And there's a lot to be said in the strength of unity. Yeah. We had loads of challenges with the likes of MSD, you know, who were more than willing to throw funding, contracts, everything at us all. But also with that came, you must do it like this, this is how we want to do it. And we were just like, oh, that's not how we're going to do it. And I remember attending a Whānau Ora hui, must have been like the last one, and someone said, and it might have been John actually, that this is not contract order, this is Whānau Ora. And so like that's just like resonated with me forever, and I continue to share that with our kaimahi always. Like the contracts are just a means to us doing our mahi. We are creative, I heard that this morning, and we will do what it takes to get the mahi done to ensure that our whānau are not left behind. So, you know, unity all the way, ko tahitanga, these po, you know, we are all well placed to demonstrate that we can uphold these po and the values that they hold.
Kia ora Tamara o tira koutou. We've got a couple of questions, so I'd like you all to have a crack at answering this one. This is a goodie. This is about trying to connect with whānau. So I think all of us know the kind of, I'm not going to say the easy stuff because it's never easy, but I'm interested in any stories or any great stories you have about connecting with whānau during COVID, the challenges you might have faced or you know of through the team, because obviously not everybody's doing the face-to-face, but your teams are, and kind of how did they overcome those challenges. So really keen on hearing some great stories or reflections on connecting with whānau. For you, Helen, I'm interested in the kind of South Island split and the, you know, I make lots of assumptions when you're in the Tokorangi Valley and Uncle Hare, don't say anything, and oh, you know, we should be able to connect easily. That doesn't always happen with our whānau and communities. Yeah. And just interested in any reflections you have, great success stories, and I should caveat it because I'm live, Tokorangi's amazing and everybody gets on. Kia ora.
I remember one story. A lot of our whānau were really wakamā about receiving anything. And so the system in the South Island is different, and they're not so much of a focus on providers, but we would work with kura, with mobile gyms, with yoga warriors, with soulful foods, whānau enterprises, whānau who were trying to make a difference through transformation in their own lives. And there was one whānau who, mum was hapu, both mum and dad didn't have work because of COVID. They both had been laid off. And had a 2-year-old and were finding it really tough but didn't want to accept any charity. And they decided that they would, one of the Whānau Ora navigators knew them, took them a hygiene pack, and they went, we're fine, we don't need anything, but we'll take it next door. And so they dropped the box off next door, and the guy there decided that he would reciprocate with giving them a kai. And so he made a kai, took it back to the whānau, and in the basis of conversation across the fence, it transpired that he was able to give Dad a job. And so sometimes, as it turned out, he also didn't want the shampoo. Mum hadn't washed her hair for a whole month because they had no shampoo. So he gave that mum the shampoo. And so, you know, sometimes it's the small stories that really make the difference. Yeah. But I think what we realised really quickly was that just saying you come from Whānau Ora doesn't get you in the door. But if you come from the boot camp or the boxing club or the kapahaka group, group, you're much more likely to be able to say, actually, I do need some help. I need some kai. I need my power bill paid. I need some blankets. And so we worked through that network. We had over 850 entities in that network, and they were able to tap into Whānau. And so it's like that ripple effect, is that it's not about what you know, it's about what those who are closest to Whānau know. So that's, I think, the lesson, the wonderful lesson of COVID is actually what was so wonderful about the funding that came in the first, in 2020, was that it did enable Whānau to support each other, and that has made Whānau more able to be self-determining, because they didn't have to rely on going to, you know, the GP or going to MSD for their support. They could rely on each other.
So, okay, cool. So I think about our collective and Taranaki as a rohe, and so what works in the north doesn't work in the south, and what was key for us is why we were, whilst we were all committed to the same kaupapa, we very much had our own autonomy, and we very much allowed, well not allowed, actually that's not even the right, enabled our communities to lead their own response and come up with their own solutions. So there was unity, but there was also mana motuhake.
Ka pai.
Kia ora.
Probably just building on exactly what the ladies have said, I was thinking about that. It is a lot of time the smaller, you know, what seems like the smaller stories, but what came to me was that through the alliance, that those that are a part of Te Tihi is about, like, I don't have to know everybody, but I have to know people who do know everybody. And that to me is how that network starts to play out. And it's not so much, it's about, well, what do you need? Because some of our different communities need different things at different times. And it's kind of like being, I don't know, maybe the conductor of the orchestra. You know, you've got all the bits and you've got all the people who know where they're going to. It's not me to direct and say, oh, you must go there and you must do this and you must go to those people. It's more about actually, here's the stuff we have. Do you need more of that? Do you need less of that? Because that's what your whānau actually need, and trying to kind of manage that and being able to be out in the community. But I was just thinking too, in the August COVID bit that we had, and even the one before, in terms of those relationships with others that work alongside our whānau in the communities, we also used it as a bit of a character building exercise too. So like we had new police who had to sort of just come on board during that time and were still establishing some of their networks. So it was, okay, we rang Cliffy, can we have you, because we need some hands as well. We don't, you know, it's not purely altruistic, but we need some kaimahi, eh? And actually it's about, well, this is an opportunity for you to go out, right out into that community with this stuff and start making some other connections, because COVID's going to end soon and you're going to need those relationships when you walk out into our communities. But I just wanted to say, it was sort of something building on it. It's about the mana of those that are known to our whānau in the communities. And I had this, my partner in crime over there, we were doing some deliveries one day, and we got to this whare, and you know, it's a nice day, whānau were outside, babies running all over the place. And we kind of pulled up in our big van to drop some kai off. And we're kind of trying to say, oh, this is, you know, Whānau Ora, da-da-da, da-da-da, and then they're just looking, not moving, just looking at us, and then I was like, Whai Kimi sent us, oh! Because it was about Whai Kimi.
Yeah.
It wasn't about the Whānau Ora, you know, here's a pack of kai. It was, and that was that thing about knowing people who know their communities.
And I think sometimes too what happened was that some people so much wanted to give that some of our kaumātua were getting 8 hot meals and going, I don't need a hot meal, this lady brought me an iPad and I don't know how to turn it on, that's what I need. And so it was actually, you know, take your cue from Whānau rather than saying, here's another hot meal.
Absolutely.
Hey, kia ora whānau, we've got the questions coming thick and fast, and I'm just looking through them. So culture is a question, but actually everything we're talking about is culture. There's a question here about this strategic kind of unity that's been formed as a consequence of COVID. So there's probably connections and networks that are working in ways that didn't pre-COVID. You know, we talk about silos, it's not contract or provider order, but there is also a way that the system makes us competitive. So I think a question for all three of you in terms of people that you maybe didn't partner with previously, but actually now they're going, hey, how do we do things together? How do we continue that? A question for all of you.
I'm not sure if it answers it, but it's just something that we've talked about. So we put some systems in places when the first COVID came along, and it was what we called the 2 o'clock hui. And the 2 o'clock hui were about all our iwi Māori providers. It was about our other whānau that worked in government organisations, and it was based around Jacinda's 1 o'clock announcements. We would hear that, digest that, understand that. 2 o'clock, we would Zoom, have quite a big Zoom, so we had all our iwi Māori providers in our rohe. We had the partners, we had the government organisations in those spaces, but with those that were in those government roles, actually, this is our forum. You're invited to the forum, and we do want you to be part of that forum, but we'll determine what that looks like. This is iwi Māori led. And so we would do that, make whatever decisions needed to be made by those that were present in there, and then kind of roll that out, have a bit of a discussion, but also in terms of staying connected as a team, we would have karakia at 9 o'clock every morning, so that we were setting our days up during that first COVID so that everybody was informed about what was needed and what we were going to do, and how anything like a government directive might have changed or influenced what we were doing. So I was kind of thinking that's just sort of a piece that helped us to keep a bit of sanity in amongst what was all upside down and what we didn't really know what was going on. And it was our forum to communicate with one another, understand if there was other things that were present that might be useful in this space. We were able to do that. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think the opportunity of tangihanga that was brought online through the times of lockdown, at first was really challenging, but through it we saw new opportunities for alliances and ways to work together, everyone being courageous and changing it up. You know, who's going to be our kai karanga on the Zoom, who's going to be our kai kōrero, and having to organise so that everyone else was mute, and you know, what do we do during karakia, and that, I think, everyone having to upskill themselves and quickly learn how to, you know, to do Zoom, to have parties on Zoom, to be able to navigate their lives online. I think that gave everybody, they were all on the same level, and so it's made for an opportunity to now do things a bit more innovatively.
I think our COVID response has really strengthened the relationships that we have with Te Whatu Ora or Taranaki, and also our iwi partners, but also MSC and others. We've been very clear on what we need moving forward, and you know, we're already building some plans in the background to ensure that we continue to be at that decision-making table. It's been really good for us.
Yeah. Helen, your story there of Zoom and that reminded me, this is just everybody can feel relieved. Government agencies aren't going to take over tikanga. I took part in a 50-50, a half and half. We were doing a whakatau for someone, and the kai kōrero was online, and I was physical in the room. It was very strange, okay? It was very, very strange. And I had a talk afterwards. I said to the other Māori fellas, hey, I don't think we should be doing things like this. And he said, yeah, you're right. So just everybody can feel relieved that the government agencies aren't doing things right, and they're not going to save us. I want to ask about favourite memories, enduring memories, because I think some amazing things have happened, yeah? And all three of you would have experienced just some things that gave you real joy in terms of stuff that you thought, wow, you know, despite all the stuff we're going through, and these are examples of Tūhono, our tupuna, connecting with us.
Yeah.
What are experiences you had during COVID that you think, wow, you know, kei te kore wa tātou tupuna, things are good? Helen?
We had a Manaaki live every day at 9:30. We would have a half-hour TV show with Rocky Roberts, and it would be zoomed to we'd be connecting into people across to Waipainamu, and I'll never forget there was a guy who was named the best dad dancer of the year, lived in Invercargill, and we got hold of him and interviewed him like, this is your spot on Manaaki Live. And it got so many likes. People were because at that time you were looking to be uplifted. You wanted, new opportunities. You don't want to be thinking about vaccines and hygiene packs. And so experiences like that, seeing that dad on TV, well, I'll show you what I did, in his gumboots and doing his dad dance, it brought joy to people's lives, having our queer tell jokes, having people, kids do a rap and want to be part of the TV show. So that's probably one of the favourite memories, is that you felt connected wherever you were. You had the girls in Kaikoura who were doing, where in the world am I? And they were every day, they were zoning in to see who could identify in Kaikoura where they were. So just the amazing energy and spirit that people have when you say, how would you lift the spirits of others? There's nothing like it.
Oh boy.
I think just probably my biggest thing was standing back after the first COVID, and just we were at a packing, seemed like a relentless kind of activity that we did through that first COVID. But there was a time when things started, we dropped a level so that more people could come. And, the karanga went out to all our iwi Māori providers, and the biggest thing for me was just the people that came. And it didn't matter who you were, what you did for a day job or whatever, the playing field was levelled in those moments. And just the harikoa of people being able to, one, be out again, but to be doing what we do, we hui, we wānanga, we kōrero, we do all those things together. And for me, that was probably the biggest amazingness that I had, was watching everybody. And we had our rangatahi come, we had our pākiki, we had our whaumiriamas, the oldies were let out for the day, all of that kind of, but just watching everybody's common purpose to do this mahi for whānau that we're going to receive in that space. So that was my biggest one.
And for me, it would most definitely be getting a greater understanding and getting to know a lot more of our kaimahi through the online platforms, meeting their tamariki, realising that, they are just like us. We're all juggling all these different kaupapa. We had a few little people forget what they were wearing, and a few moments where mics were on. There was a lot of fun. There was cook-offs, there was bake-offs, there was some real inappropriate chat going on, but their spirits were high, and they were happy, and I was really thankful that Tūhono Ora was able to move to technology really quickly, because it meant that no one was left behind, and we were always available for whatever. And we did get some care packages delivered to ourselves, which was nice. And then the only other thing would be rongoa made a massive comeback.
Yes.
And for us, we got to share rongoa with a lot of our colleagues, our non-Māori colleagues, our doctors, and that was incredible, actually. And there's way more value being placed on rongoa now, so that was a massive highlight too.
Kapai, we've got the last question, and it's just a quick one. What's the thing that you want to carry on that COVID you experienced during COVID, and you're going to hold on to that practice or that approach because you know it's good? And we might start with you, Tamara.
Disruption. Disruption. I'll say respectful disruption, but disruption. Yeah, most definitely. I think I have been inspired. There's so many inspirational people here. I take away a little bit of all of the different kōrero, and it just fills my kete again, and then, inspires me to just keep disrupting and not settling for status quo anymore.
Ness?
If I roll it into one sentence, does it make it one? I think it's about maintaining this momentum of change and energy that goes to the change, but that's through the ongoing and enduring relationships that were in existence, but have strengthened and intensified over time. And for us across Sarohe, across iwi, across marae, across whānau, that's probably my biggest, that it just continues to be.
Whitirangi was telling me with Te Rangi Tupua, they decided to change the age of when you're allowed to, of staying home till 60 rather than 70, to have that protection for kaumātua at home. And what that reminds me of is the bold spirit of resistance, but also resilience. Yeah. That, you know, we can do for ourselves, we can change the rules so that it works for us, and we can always rely on whānau, on wakapapa, to be our solution, to be our rongoa, to be the cause for what we stand for. And that's what we need to build on from this, is that we can do it, we have shown it, the world has seen it, and we just need to continue to make sure that others recognise that.
Lovely.
E te iwi, please, ho mai ko te paki paki.